so I will kind of quickly slip out for that. But we just begin in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Heavenly Father, as we continue our journey of Acts of the Apostles, the story of our church, we recognize it's our story. It's the roots of our faith. And once again, we ask for the graces we need to be leaders in our own time, to be witnesses in our own time, to show the same kind of determination and boldness and courage that these early Christians did under the guidance of that same Holy Spirit that is available to us. We ask you to send your Holy Spirit to be with us today. Inspire us to live out our faith in a more dynamic, joyful way. Help us to support each other on this journey of life. And we, in a special way, we lift up to you those beloved parishioners who've recently passed on in these days, especially Cecilia Rayburn and Dennis Davis and Herb Penta, and their souls and the souls of all the faithful departed through the mercy of God, that they may rest in peace. Amen. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Okay, so brief recap. As I mentioned last time, we are now sort of entered into a crime drama. It's a courtroom drama like you see on TV. It's kind of shifted from being a history of the church to more a history of St. Paul's final days. And for that reason, there's probably a reason why these readings don't tend to make the cut in mass liturgies. There's not a heavy amount of theological content in them. It's more story value. It's a storyline, but there's not a deep, complex level of theology like Paul's letters, for example, might contain. But it's good to know these, because if not for our study, some of you may have never would have read this. It will be new information for some of you. But what we recall last time, just in brief, is St. Paul, in the closing weeks of his third missionary journey, he says that in every town he stops at, he's getting an urgent signal from the Holy Spirit to get back to Jerusalem in time for Pentecost, and that their trials and sufferings are going to come his way, but he has a sense it's God's will anyway. Other people also sense something bad is going to happen, but in their case, they try to stop him from going back to Jerusalem, and he finally gets upset with everybody and says, hey, you need to trust in God's plan here. I'm ready to die if that's my fate. And as I've said, quoting from one of his letters, whether, if I live for the Lord. If I die in the Lord. And whether I live or I die, I'm happy. I'm at peace. Because I fought the good fight. I run the race to the finish. That's how he preached to us. It's how he lived his life, which is kind of reassuring to know that a teacher is following his own teachings. Ultimately, he gets to Jerusalem, and there is still some tension about this transition from Judaism to Christianity. Many of the local clergy are saying that they have misgivings about Paul because they keep hearing he's saying just totally do away with old Jewish law, and so they advise him that he would make a good showing if he accompanied some Nazarites to the temple, pay alms and accompany them and show the people that he's actually not so militant against some of the pious Jewish practices. And he does this, but it causes a riot because a rumor is spread amongst the people that he's brought Gentiles into the temple area and violated custom, which he didn't do. But from that point on, we enter into a story of what I called last time the first historical account of arresting someone and taking them into protective custody. Because the Roman soldiers can't figure out what's going on, but they do know that if they stand by and do nothing, that this Paul is going to be torn apart by the crowds. And so they arrest him without putting charges against him, and they take him into the Roman barracks for protection. This is, I mentioned last time, the same place Pontius Pilate stayed every time he came to Jerusalem. It's the same place all the Roman governors stayed, because this is where all the soldiers are. It has the best protection for them. But if you've ever been to Jerusalem, and if you had the amazing opportunity to do the Stations of the Cross from the original location where they occur. The first Station of the Cross today starts in the Islamic quarter of Jerusalem, and it's a mosque. So you go to the outer wall of a mosque, and it's, when we did it, at least in the middle of the night, it was still pitch dark out, but it was the first call for daily prayer. So all these Muslims were going to the mosque, and we're out there, and it felt kind of intimidating a little bit, to be honest with you, but that's the place where Pontius Pilate washed his hands of Jesus' situation. It's where that first station scene took place, and then you proceed from there to Golgotha, within the walled city. While he's there, they decided to question him under scourging, which, human rights wasn't a real big priority for the Romans. Their priority was Pax Romana. We don't like riots, we don't like civil unrest, and it's okay if we have to take out a few innocent people along the way, all for the greater cause. But he lets them know he's a Roman citizen, and that they arrested somebody that they shouldn't have arrested, that they could potentially face serious problems. So the rest of the story has to do with trying to sort this out through a variety of trials. They take him to the Sanhedrin the next day, and he decides he's not going to get a fair hearing there, so he causes another riot by splitting the Pharisees against the Sadducees, and they have to take him into protective custody a second time. And then word comes to Paul through his nephew that there is an assassin squad being formed. A group of 40-plus men who've taken a vow not to eat or drink until Paul's dead. And they're coming up with creative ways to, let's see if we can get this prisoner transferred or moved, and we'll get word where they're going, and we'll ambush them, and we'll murder him, even if it's a suicide mission. And so the last thing we read the other day was the Romans decided for security measures to transfer Paul out of Jerusalem entirely, to take him out of the city. So they take roughly 600-ish soldiers, and they escort him out of Jerusalem in the middle of the night to Caesarea Maritima, the major maritime port of the Roman Navy, where there is no way an assassin squad is going to get to Paul in that place. It's basically a city almost entirely populated by Roman soldiers. That's like walking on a military base today and trying to assassinate someone when you don't have military clearance. You're not getting on the base. From there, the very last thing was the governor at the time, whose name is Felix. They decide they will get a hearing before him so he can sort things out. And I mentioned to you, Felix is the third governor after Pontius Pilate. There's Pontius Pilate, there's some dude I don't know, and then there's Felix, and we'll hear of the fourth one today, Festus, but that's where we left it. So chapter 24 begins with Paul coming before Felix in Caesarea, the promised hearing. Of that stuff I took broad strokes about, which was the last two classes, basically the content of the last two classes. Any reactions or questions or things that carry over from previous classes that anyone would like to raise a point about? We good? Okay. So let's just pick up from chapter 24 then. It says, after 5 days, the high priest Ananias came down with some elders and spokesmen, one Tertullus. They laid before the governor their case against Paul, and when he was called, Tertullus began to accuse him, saying, since through you we enjoy much peace, and since by your provision, most excellent Felix, reforms are introduced on behalf of this nation in every way and everywhere, we accept this with all gratitude. But to detain you no further, I beg you in your kindness to hear us briefly, for we have found this man a pestilent fellow, an agitator among all the Jews throughout the world, and a ringleader of the sect of the Nazarenes. He even tried to profane the temple, but we seized him. By examining him yourself, you will be able to learn from him about everything of which we accuse him. The Jews also joined in the charge, affirming that all this was so. Okay, so this is like the opening argument of the prosecuting attorney. They've actually journeyed. I don't know how much of a hike it is. For us, it was a bus ride, but it's pretty good to hike. I don't know how many miles if someone was able to look on a scale, but to walk from Jerusalem to the coast of the Mediterranean, it's probably multiple days hike. Anyway, obviously the Sanhedrin sent representatives from the Sanhedrin, marched out to Caesarea Maritima. I'm going to say, I'll just go out on a limb and say maybe it was nearly 5 days journey because it's 5 days later, and that makes sense that first this hearing has to get on the docket for Felix, but also these guys, as they come out, they have to journey out there toward this place for a trial. And mostly what you just heard was them sucking up to the Romans. I am sure they didn't believe any of that stuff. They were kissing up to them, complimenting them with, "You're doing so many great things, and we appreciate it so much, and we love your reforms, and we don't want to waste your time." So we'll just be quick on our accusation. Footnotes of my Bible point out two things. So there's a kind of a sly strategy they're using here. It's already been made clear by Romans in previous cases. Just recall a few. Jesus, Pontius Pilate said, "You're talking about a bunch of Jewish law stuff that I don't care about. Why are you bringing this case to me?" He didn't want to be involved in religious stuff. Same thing happened with Stephen, first martyr of Christians. The local authorities are able to separate out religious argument from civil law, and they were not interested in getting involved in religious argument. So they know that from the outset that Felix will be inclined not to be involved in religious law. So although they mention that they think Paul's also guilty of violating temple regulations, they don't really dwell on it. The 2 points they bring up, which my footnotes say are violation of Roman law. One, let me see. So one has to do, he portrayed Paul as a troublemaker who provokes disturbances wherever he goes. The implication is that Paul is an enemy of peace and a threat to Roman order. But just that he is a constant threat to civil stability. That is one charge they're bringing against him. This guy's a troublemaker. And it must be said, fair point. I mean, everywhere he goes, there's a city riot. There can be a case made for that one. The second one, he also tries to disassociate Paul from Judaism and make him the ringleader of a new and unproven religion. In that time, Romans allowed for strange foreign religions because their goal really was to conquer the whole known world. So in their practicality, I assume they knew or had a sense they'd come across these things. But they had to officially approve them first before they would be an acceptable religious practice that you could participate in publicly. And Christianity was not yet approved by the Roman Empire. In fact, evidence from Roman history is that they weren't clear that Christianity was a religion separate from Judaism still. Decades later, they considered it a sect of Judaism. So I gave one example when Claudius kicked the Jews out of Rome, he also kicked the Christians out of Rome. This happened also with Nero, the fire of Rome, and he blamed it on the Jews. Again, Jews and Christians were thrown into one big pot and blamed together. So that gives you a sense from the Romans' mind, these guys are similar. They're from the same part of the world. I don't understand the difference between them. We kick them all out. So that was the case that the critics were trying to make. He's promoting an unlicensed religion, and he's causing riots. Then Paul speaks from verse 10. I'll read it, but basically his argument is, you have no proof. You've not provided any proof that I started the riot. I came with peaceful intent. I came just to pray. I came to pay alms. I I wasn't shouting around doing strange stuff. I was just trying to live out my faith. It's you guys who caused the riot, and he particularly blames some pilgrims from Ephesus. He said, if you want to settle this, go find those guys. They're the ones who caused this. And to Felix, he also says this, I believe in the same God of the Jews. It's just that the difference is, I believe the prophecies they talk about have not been fulfilled. They don't realize it yet. So his argument is, I'm not promoting a new religion in a sense. I believe in the same God, Yahweh. It's just now his Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. It's a Trinitarian God. He doesn't get into the weeds too deeply. He just, for this Roman guy, just to say, actually, it's not a new religion. That's his counterpoint. So you hear his speech here. I'm kind of curious, by the way, who is the eyewitness who recorded this? Because it's quotations, so whether they got a copy of the court transcript or exactly how, it seems carefully recorded, which the Romans were very particular about. There are a lot of Roman transcripts from courts that have survived today. But it says, when the governor had motioned him, Paul replied, realizing that for many years you've been judge over this nation, I cheerfully make my defense. As you may ascertain, it is not more than 12 days since I went up to worship in Jerusalem, and they did not find me disputing with anyone or stirring up a crowd, either in the temple or in the synagogue or in the city. Neither can they prove to you that they now bring up what they bring up against me. But this I admit to you, that according to the way which they call a sect, I worship the God of our fathers, believing everything laid down by the law or written in the prophets, having a hope in God, which these themselves accept, that there will be a resurrection of both the just and the unjust. So I always take pains to have a clear conscience toward God and toward men. Now after some years I came to bring to my nation alms and offerings. As I was doing this, they found me purified in the temple without any crowd or tumult. But some Jews from Asia, they ought to be here before you and to make an accusation if they have anything against me. Or else let these men themselves say what wrongdoing they found when I stood before the council, except this one thing which I cried out while standing among them. With respect to the resurrection of the dead, I am on trial before you this day. That's very similar to the argument he made to the Sanhedrin, because he recognized the Pharisees believe in life after death, they believe in the resurrection, the Sadducees don't. So I'm not sure I follow that argument myself, to be honest, but he's basically saying what I summarized, that from his point of view, this is not a new thing. Felix, having a rather accurate knowledge of the way, this is interesting to me. So apparently, Felix knows a thing or two about Christianity at this point. That means he's probably been dealing with a number of civil unrest stories like this. But it says he put them off, saying, when Lysias the tribune comes down and will decide your case. Then he gave orders to the centurion that he should be kept in custody, but should have some liberty, and that none of his friends should be prevented from attending to his needs. Classic politician, Felix. He decides there's no benefit for him to make a solid decision. The thing that comes to mind for me is Pontius Pilate washing his hands. It's like, you know what, I'm going to get another person, I'll try to get him to make the decision, I can blame it on him. Lysias, the tribune, would be basically the sheriff. It's like, okay, I'm the governor, but I think I'm going to bring the sheriff in and let him weigh in on the law. Now if you don't like it, I can distance myself. Sly political move. But he doesn't treat Paul to stay. He allows visitors. It's basically house arrest, kind of casual. It's worth mentioning again, though. I'll say it again. The prison process in the ancient world, they didn't sentence people for long periods of time in payment or punishment for a crime. You held someone until a trial was complete or until execution could be carried out. often on a big feast day or a festival. So it's really the only time prison cells were used. And the Jews used them if someone was arrested after hours, if there was going to be a violation of the Sabbath or whatever. So it didn't use prison as a punitive or a reforming kind of measure. It was really more short-term. They think still at this point this will get resolved fairly quickly. So he waits for Lysias to arrive. And then we pick up from verse 24. It says, after some days, Felix came with his wife Drusilla, who was Jewish. Oh, interesting. You got a Roman guy married a local Jew. He fell in love there locally, I guess. Maybe that's how he might know something about the way as well. I don't know. I don't know how common that would be for a Roman to marry clearly someone who's not a citizen of Rome. Anyway, I have no information about that, but his marriage is kind of culturally mixed marriage. And he sent for Paul and heard him speak upon faith in Christ Jesus. And as he argued about justice and self-control and future judgment, Felix was alarmed and said, go away for the present. When I have an opportunity, I will summon you. At the same time, he hoped that money would be given him by Paul. So he sent for him often and conversed with him. But when 2 years had elapsed, Felix was succeeded by Porcius Festus, and desiring to do the Jews a favor, Felix left Paul in prison. Okay, one important detail here. Graft, or taking bribes, I've mentioned before, it was culturally an acceptable thing. The example that we spoke of recently was one way in which you could become a Roman citizen. Just grease the wheel. Because, hey, we have a saying in the Catholic Church, I don't know if this is it. I mean, this might not inspire you to piety or holiness, but the saying is this among clergy. The further away from the bishop you are, the more the bishop you are. You ever heard that saying? In other words, if you're in the bishop, this is not my spirit, just so you know, in case Archbishop Samuel, in case you're watching, I fully subscribe to holy obedience, but the idea that if you're in the bishop's backyard, maybe you will have more of a sense of awareness that I need to do things according to the Book of Oil, but if I get out into the hinterland, I can do whatever I want, because how is someone ever going to find out in a position of authority? It's kind of similar in the Roman Empire. When you think of how spread out it is, some of these officials, the idea from among many of them, it seems from history, is, how's the emperor going to find out about this? This is my chance to build up my 401k plan a little bit better. So, to take bribes in order to process paperwork or to give people cuts in line and move their case ahead faster, great opportunities. And it you know, there's also a lot of scandal in terms of tax collection. This is why tax collectors were so often hated. There was a prescribed amount of tax that they had to collect and turn in if they wanted to keep their license to be a tax collector. But the Romans turned a blind eye as they wanted to ask for more. The upper limitation was, but if you cause a riot, then I'm going to execute you. So you can push it a bit, but if you push it so far that everyone shows up with pitchforks and torches and wants to kill the local tax collector, then guess what? You're going to get fired. But the way we fire people in ancient Rome is, we're going to behead you or whatever. So you sort of took calculated risks, but it's very much kind of like a mafioso mentality. If I can skim a little bit, I will. So here is Felix trying to do that very thing. For 2 years, just after I said prisons were not used for extended stays, so he's trying hard. But my sense I get is that Paul's also trying hard to convert him to Christianity, so it feels like, you know, when you push it a little too hard about this religion stuff, I'm going to end our meetings and send you back to jail, but I'm going to keep bringing you out just in case. Maybe you have a relative, maybe there's somebody you know who would like you to go free, and I can get something out of this deal. So that's a long stay, and I told you last time, it's not in Paul's interest to be free. He does not want to be free for two reasons. On the practical side, he knows he's going to get murdered if he gets free. He wouldn't last 24 hours outside of jail. There's too many people who want him dead. But more importantly for him, it's his deepest dream to proclaim the gospel in Rome. And God revealed to him last time when he was in prison, you will get to go to Rome. This is how it's going to unfold. So he doesn't want to be set free. He knows that in appealing to Caesar for trial, they will be forced to take him to Rome. And he'll have that opportunity. So I can imagine him just being like a monk. He goes back to his cell and returns to prayer. And he's just in contemplative state of mind. In the meantime, Felix has been now replaced by the fourth governor, Festus. I don't know if they had term limits. I don't think they did, but I got a feeling how it would work is a promotion has opened up for you, Felix, elsewhere. So we're going to send you up the ladder and just moving people around that way. And this new guy who arrives, whose name is Porcius Festus. Well, Festus for sure. That brings us to chapter 25, okay? Any questions about chapter 24? Kind of straightforward. Go ahead and back.
Is Luke a witness at this time?
That I don't know. There's no we passage here. And I just go back to Luke. He has described his method of writing this, which is talk to as many eyewitnesses as he can. And if there's written record, borrow that, beginning with his own travel journal. That part feels like to me like it was lifted off a court record. So if I had to guess, I would say probably not. But maybe he inquired to the local records and was able to copy verbatim, what was said in those opening arguments, because it's all in quotations. I don't care how good of a mind you have. How do you write that fast if you're, if you're trying to record it live? The way the Chosen tried to handle that question, how does Matthew write down the whole Sermon on the Mount? You can't write fast enough. They supposed that Jesus is thinking out loud, how will I say this? And he was taking Matthew with him early on in the days ahead. He's writing bits of it as it goes, so that he knew in advance what was going to be said. Kind of like working with a speechwriter before you actually give the speech. That's my best guess, but I don't know definitively. Earl had hand up.
I just wondered, the people like Ananias, were they Sadducees from the leaders of the temple?
Ananias would be the head of, the question is, was he a Sadducee or a Pharisee? He's head of the Sanhedrin. The text doesn't reveal which camp he's in, but if I have to guess, I'm going to say Ananias was probably a Sadducee, because if you recall, he ordered Paul to be slapped in the face or punched in the face. His opening sentence, he barely starts talking, and Ananias said, punch that guy in the face, would you please, for me? That doesn't sound like a Pharisee, because Paul identifies as being a Pharisee. So the Pharisees said, we don't see anything wrong with this guy. In fact, we kind of like him. You should let him go. So if I had to guess, I would say Sadducee.
I was just going to say, before the advent of writing, people supposedly had just really incredible memories.
It could be that as well. I have to be open to the possibility that you have incredible memory. Still, it's a lot of stuff to recall. So, I do say that I'm trying to make the argument that Luke is one of history's first investigative journalists, because that's how he described his method. He said, before people died, I wanted to interview every living witness I could to determine the facts of the matter for myself. That would include Romans, that would include Gentiles, that would include any kind of record you could get access to. And I think the Romans were, they were not stingy about that stuff. They archived records, I think you could get access to historical records, depending on how valuable or rare the copies were or whatever, but under the right circumstances, I think you could have have access because, believe it or not, in ancient Greek and Rome, law and order were a big thing. Actually, that's one of the central things that brought stability to their government, why their empire lasted as long as it did before insanity kicked in.
Weren't the priests mostly Sadducees as opposed to the Pharisees, who were not necessarily of the priestly class?
The priests were 100% Sadducees. So the question is, again, about Sadducees and Pharisees. Priest is to Sadducee as, I'll just say, as rabbi is to Pharisee.
Okay.
And priest and Sadducee are to temple as Pharisee and rabbi are to synagogue.
So as being a high priest, he would have been a Sadducee. So Ananias was.
But if you were on the Sanhedrin, you could be elected. It's
to be the high priest.
the Sanhedrin is made up of both Pharisees and Sadducees. So you could, I mean, I guess technically they viewed all of them as rabbis. It's just the Sadducees had a lineage. You know, they passed their office from father to son in the male line. It was family business. It was the tribe of Levi. Whereas the Pharisees were lay people, and they didn't pass their office from father to son. It was more like, honestly, it's closest to evangelical ministry today. They call it the evangelical who might have a daytime job and only preach on the weekend, or might feel inspired to take up this line of work. That's the Pharisees, more. They're street preachers.
Well, it says that Ananias was the son of, well, here's a name I'm not going to even attempt, who was the high priest from 47 to 59. So he was.
But the high priest was, you know, the priesthood was handed down from father to son. The high priest was not. It was chosen by either election or lottery, but there was a process of choosing the high priest. Yeah. It's just that probably out of prestige, though. If your father or your grandfather or multiple people in your family tree held this office, that probably adds to the chance that you might also get elected. They view that you come from a solid family, theologians or whatever. Earl.
Well, that was one of the problems with the Maccabees, is that they sold out the priesthood and took it over.
Yeah. Well, we've been hearing, yesterday we heard about the corruption in the priesthood from ancient times from Ezekiel. And that's a problem, is that if you hand something off in such a fashion, you know, not everyone in the inheritance line is going to be holy or worthy of that calling or even interested in that calling. Some of them might be interested in what can I make out of this? How can I gather riches or sell what I have? You know, so not good. Not a good system. Okay, so let's pick up from chapter 25 then. This is a continuation. So now when Festus had come into his province, after 3 days, he went up to Jerusalem from Caesarea. So he has just arrived. He's like if a new pastor came to town, you take a drive around Medford and say, okay, let's check out the parish boundary, let's go see all the missions, let's see the hospital, let's see what I got here to work with. This governor, he's actually very smart in this. He decides, well, I'm going to go see Jerusalem because that's the prime city of my governance here, of my sector. And so as soon as he can get settled into his home, that's like 3 days to move into your house. And first, order of business, let me get a Roman escort, I'm going to go check this place out. And the very first thing that happens when he gets to Jerusalem, he gets hit up by people who are asking him about this Paul guy. Again, they're trying to see if they can get him to be moved out of Caesarea Maritima, where they might be able to assassinate him. So it says, the chief priests and the principal men of the Jews informed him against Paul, and they urged him, asking as a favor to have the man sent to Jerusalem, planning an ambush to kill him on the way. Festus replied that Paul was being kept in Caesarea, and that he himself intended to go there shortly. So said he, let the men of authority among you go down with me, and if there's anything wrong about the man, let them accuse him. So, again, I give him credit. That's a wise move. He doesn't know who his friends or enemies are yet. He's only here 3 days, and he's like, I don't think I feel any necessary need to concede your request. Let's keep status quo. He must be in Caesarea Maritima for a reason. He's secure there. I'm not going to bring him to you. If you want to bring this up, you come to me. Come to, it's a home game for me. It's going to be an away game for you. You'll just have to, you can join my escort if you want, but the trial's going to take place in Caesarea Maritima. When he had stayed among them no more than 8 or 10 days, he went down to Caesarea. Again, down means anything that's not Jerusalem. It has nothing to do with direction on the compass. It's actually would be literally almost straight west. But you always go up to Jerusalem. Everywhere else is down. So they go down to Caesarea. And the next day he took his seat on the tribunal and ordered Paul to be brought. Now I'm thinking, I modify my travel time. If they're able to get there in one day, I don't know if he's on horses or chariot or whatever, but they all seem to be able to get there in one good long day of hiking.
It's 55 miles.
How much?
55.
Thanks for looking it up. I would say that's more than one day, so they must have really boogied. People must have had some form of transport, horses or something. 55 miles, I would say 20-mile hike would be like max for a normal person. That's like a three-day hike, it seems.
The Romans could actually march like 50 miles in a day.
That is true. That is a fact. I read that in Roman history. Roman soldiers, if they needed to, they could cover 50 or 60 miles in a day. Like forced march with packs and everything, if time was of the essence. But we would say normal, for a healthy, mobile person, 20 miles is a pretty big day's hike. So anyway, thank you for looking up the scale. That gives you a sense of direction. And when he had come, the Jews who had gone down from Jerusalem stood about him, bringing against him many serious charges, which they could not prove. So basically, we're back in the same boat again. They're saying the same things, they still lack evidence. Paul said in his defense, neither against the law of the Jews, nor against the temple, nor against Caesar have I offended at all. But Festus, wishing to do the Jews a favor, said to Paul, do you wish to go up to Jerusalem and there be tried on these charges before me? But Paul said, I am standing before Caesar's tribunal, where I ought to be tried. To the Jews I have done no wrong, as you know very well. If then I am a wrongdoer and have committed anything for which I deserve to die, I do not seek to escape death. But if there is nothing in their charges against me, no one can give me up to them. I appeal to Caesar. Then Festus, when he had conferred with his council, answered, this is a very Shakespearean line, your appeal to Caesar you shall go. And I bet you he's cheering the whole time, because again, classic politician, good, I don't have to decide this then. I'm off the hook, because he's trying to decide, I don't want to make waves, who should I please, who's on my side, and now he gets to totally dodge the point. But Paul did a kind of clever thing there, because he's basically saying, I'm a Roman citizen, I trust your justice, and here we are, this is the highest court in the land technically, why would I go to an inferior court, like a district court, when this is basically the state Supreme Court? So let's decide it here. But this is the strategic, for him it fulfills God's providence when he said, I appeal to Caesar. But everyone else involved in this case considers this the greatest mistake Paul made. Because as soon as you say, I appeal to Caesar, your fate is sealed. You are basically saying, I'm going to skip all my other legal options. If your goal is to get free, and if you catch Caesar on a bad day when he's in a bad mood, you do not have an appeal from Caesar. So occasionally this happens, by the way, with like marriage annulment cases. There are certain grounds for annulment, which I urge people, maybe don't do this on your first move. You can go straight to the Vatican. The problem is if you go straight to the Vatican and they deny your claim, you're done. You don't have another option. So anyway, when he says appeal to Caesar, that puts the wheels in motion that he's going there. And then we come to King Agrippa. King Agrippa, to confuse matters, his name was actually Herod Agrippa III, I think. He's the great-grandson of Herod the Great. So this is the fourth generation of that, and he's a king in the north, but he must be in town for some reason in Jerusalem, maybe another religious holiday. And I shared with Bernice in her office, this is the first time I'm aware that your name comes up in the Bible, the wife of Agrippa. But he hears the king's in town, so he gets another idea. Here's the thing, if you read ahead here and were a little confused, he's not referring to Agrippa for an appeal. It's already taken care of. It's going to go to Caesar. What he's worried about is one remaining thing. I cannot send this guy to Caesar without charging him with something. I mean, there's still really no case. He says there's no evidence of any wrongdoing I've made. There's no case. Paul maintains he's innocent. So we really shouldn't even be holding him under arrest. But if I trouble the emperor by sending this guy all the way to Rome, and he comes before him and says, I don't even know why I'm here, that's going to reflect badly on me. That may come back to bite me. So he's actually turning to this fellow ruler of Israel and saying, help me figure out something to charge this guy with. So that when we put him on the boat, it looks like a solid case. Otherwise, I may be causing myself political suicide down the road. That's what it's really about here. So it says, now when some days had passed, Agrippa the king and Bernice arrived at Caesarea to welcome Festus. Okay, so they're there, seems like for political reasons, just say, new ruler in the south, let's shake hands, let's meet. That'd be a good idea. Grease the palm, shake, as politicians do. It says they stayed there many days, so he's house guest, a chance to become friends or get to know each other a little bit better. Festus laid Paul's case before the king, saying, there's a man left prisoner by Felix. This is what I was mentioning to you. There's a guy down there in the cellar. And when I was at Jerusalem, the chief priests and the elders of the Jews gave information about him, asking for sentence against him. I answered them that it was not the custom of the Romans to give up anyone before the accused met the accusers face to face. That's a pretty advanced legal principle. The opportunity to confront your accuser in a court of law, and had an opportunity to make a defense concerning the charge laid against him. When therefore they came together here, I made no delay, but on the next day took my seat on the tribunal and ordered the man to be brought in. When the accusers stood up, they brought no charge in his case of such evils as I supposed, but they had certain points of dispute with him about their own superstition and about one Jesus, who was dead, but whom Paul asserted to be alive. This is an interesting thing right there, because first of all, it seems to me, it seems to me as a Roman, he would accept the Roman gods, but it kind of, implication to me at least, I would imagine this guy as, I accept the Roman gods as a politically astute position, but not a particularly religious guy. Probably as close to an atheist as you could find in the ancient world, and he's calling what they believe in superstition. And though they brought up legal points, it's clear he's not accepting any of their legal points. He's actually saying, I think it's coming down to a point of fact. Well, these guys say this Jesus guy's dead, and this guy says he's alive. I don't know what to make of it, These people said they witnessed him being killed. This guy says, no, you're mistaken. So, like, it's a dispute of a point of fact rather than a legal matter. And he's not like Felix. Felix, it said, was familiar with the way, with teachings of the way. This guy, he seems like straight out of Rome. Like, I don't know about these Palestinian gods. Whatever they're talking about, I have no idea what this Jesus is. He probably had not heard of the case of Jesus because he's new to the area. So, we're just saying, you're talking about this guy, dead or alive, they don't agree. I don't even know where they're in court. But also says from verse 20, being at a loss how to investigate these questions, I asked whether he wished to go to Jerusalem and be tried there regarding them. But when Paul had appealed to be kept in custody for the decision of the emperor, I commanded him to be held until I could send him to Caesar. And Agrippa said to Festus, I should like to hear the man myself. Tomorrow, said he, you shall hear him. So Agrippa gets a chance now to hear Paul, and ultimately I won't read through all of it, but this will be a retelling of the conversion of St. Paul. So it's a second telling. First one was live. Maybe it's the third one. It's the third one now. He told it to the Sanhedrin, and now he's retelling it again a third time. Each time he adds different details to it, but his journey on the road to Damascus. So the next day, after they have wined and dined and have a totally relaxed schedule, I'm sure, they got in an early round of golf, they are ready to hear some political stuff, and Paul is brought out of his prison cell. From verse 24, it says, Festus said, King Agrippa, and all who are present with us, you see this man, about whom the whole Jewish people petitioned me, both at Jerusalem and here, shouting that he ought not to live any longer, but I found that he had done nothing deserving death, and as he himself appealed to the emperor, I decided to send him. But I have nothing definite to write to my Lord about him. This is where I get that sense. He's trying to charge him with something, and it looks kind of idiotic and like you're not doing your job very well if you're allowing these things even to take up the time of Emperor Nero. By the way, Emperor Nero is the emperor at this time. To the best estimate, Festus is ruling, arrives sometime between 57 and 59 AD. We know St. Paul's beheaded in early 60s AD. Nero is the emperor of Rome from 54 to 68 AD. So this is right in the middle of Nero's time ruling. He was a crazy man. Nero's, he had a lot of problems. Interesting history to read about that guy. So you do not want to get on the bad side of Nero. So he says on 26, but I have nothing definite to write to my Lord about him. Therefore, I brought him before you, and especially before you, King Agrippa, that after we have examined him, I may have something to write. For it seems to me unreasonable in setting a prisoner not to indicate the charge against him. And Agrippa said to Paul, you have permission to speak for yourself. Then Paul stretched out his hand and made his defense. This is the start of 26. I think myself fortunate that it is before you, King Agrippa, I am to make my defense today against all the accusations of the Jews, because you're especially familiar with all the customs and controversies of the Jews. I think he's saying that to him. It's a nice rhetorical way to start, and it's also kind of kissing up to the guy a little bit. So it's a good public speaking technique. But I think he says it in part in contrast. It tells me something also about Festus. By saying this, that you're familiar with our customs, he's kind of saying, this Festus guy doesn't know anything about Palestine. So I'm glad you're here. So I don't have to re-explain a bunch of basic stuff. I can just get to the heart of the matter. Therefore, I beg you to listen to me patiently. And he recalls the same pattern. He started off pious. He had a great teacher. He led the persecution. But then something supernatural happened and changed it. So I'll just, for the sake of time, I'll read it. My manner of life from my youth, spent from the beginning among my own nation, and at Jerusalem is known by all the Jews, meaning Paul's a famous guy. He really, in the field of academia and theology, he's a bit of a celebrity. They have known for a long time that they're willing to testify that according to the strictest party of our religion, I have lived as a Pharisee, and now I stand here on trial for hope in the promise made by God to our fathers, to which our 12 tribes hope to attain, as they earnestly worship night and day. And for this hope I am accused by Jews, O king. Why is it thought incredible by any of you that God raises the dead? So, again, I'm not exactly sure why he thinks this is the best way to go, but he's trying to make a case, at least in this moment. I'm on trial because I'm a Pharisee, or my Pharisaical roots, because I believe in the resurrection, I believe in life after death. And I thought all of us Jews believed in this. This was our hope. So why am I being picked on, basically? I myself was convinced that I ought to do many things in opposing the name of Jesus of Nazareth, and I did so in Jerusalem. I not only shut up many of the saints in prison by authority from the chief priest, but when they were put to death, I cast my vote against them. This is, when we see the movie, for those of you who can screen, this is the detail that I like best about the movie. I said last time, if you were away, that the supposed plausible explanation of the thorn in Paul's side is the fact that he's constantly plagued by nightmares, realizing he caused many of the earliest wave of deaths of the saints of the Christian movement, that all these martyrs died because of him, and he bears that weight, and he's asking, did I do enough to make up for it? Did I balance the scales with my missionary work? Did I suffer enough? But he's plagued by that. And he's saying here, yeah, I caused them to be executed. It wasn't just nicey arrest. When they were being drugged and chained back to Jerusalem, they were all killed. Many martyrs. And it says, I did so in Jerusalem. I not only shut up many of the saints in prison by authority of the chief priest, but when they were put to death, I cast my vote against them, and I punished them often in all the synagogues, and tried to make them blaspheme, and in raging fury against them, I persecuted them even to foreign cities. So when he says foreign cities, that's Damascus. He's going now to Syria, to another country. He's moving from the United States to Canada and saying, I'm taking this international. I want persecution against this movement to be global because it's spreading so rapidly. Foreign cities. Thus I journeyed to Damascus with the authority and commission of the chief priests. At midday, O king, I saw on the way a light from heaven, brighter than the sun shining around me, and those who journeyed with me. And when we had all fallen to the ground, by the way, notice, there's no falling off a horse or falling out of a chariot. It sounds like they're hiking, even though artists of the Middle Ages liked to paint Paul falling off a horse. I heard a voice say to me in Hebrew language, Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me? It hurts you to kick against the goads. And I said, who are you, Lord? And the Lord said, I'm Jesus whom you're persecuting. Arise and stand upon your feet, for I have appeared to you for this purpose, to appoint you to serve and bear witness to the things in which you have seen me, and to those in which I will appear to you, delivering you from the people and for the Gentiles to whom I send you, to open their eyes, that they may turn from darkness to light, and from the power of Satan to God, that they may receive forgiveness of sins and a place among those who are sanctified by faith in me. And then he goes on to say, so that's what I did. He's like, these guys are accusing me, in other words, I'm not some stranger. I used to work for them. I was their favorite guy. And now I'm on the other team. But I'm on the other team because something supernatural and powerful happened. And that's all I've been doing ever since, is doing what as Jesus instructed me to do. And I'll just skip ahead to verse 24. It says, and as he thus made his defense, Festus said in a loud voice, Paul, you are mad. Your great learning is turning you mad. And Paul said, I'm not mad, most excellent Festus, but I am speaking the sober truth, for the king knows about these things. And to him I speak freely, for I am persuaded that none of these things has escaped his notice, for this was not done in a corner. King Agrippa, do you believe the prophets? I know that you believe. And Agrippa said to Paul, in a short time you think to make me a Christian? And Paul said, whether short or long, I I would to God that not only you, but also all who hear me this day might become such as me, except for these chains. Like, Agrippa's like threatened by me, trying to convert me now. And then this is a very kind of telling line from verse 30 to 32. Then the king arose, and the governor and Bernice, and those who were sitting with them. And when they were withdrawn, they said to one another, "This man is doing nothing to deserve death or imprisonment." And Agrippa said to Festus, "This man could have been set free if he had not appealed to Caesar." Why do we know this? That's a private conversation between Bernice and Agrippa and Festus. I have no idea, except one of those must have become Christian. How does Luke get this testimony from a private conversation? But this kind of reveals the point I was trying to make earlier. Like, none of us feel good about this. This guy's obviously innocent. We all think he's innocent. He's clearly getting railroaded by people who just don't like his theology. But we can't let him go. Our own law now won't let him go because he appealed to Caesar, so we're stuck. That's ultimately going to be the great blessing, because in the last two chapters, when we meet next time, it entails Paul sailing to Rome and getting shipwrecked along the way, getting stuck for a time, and eventually arriving in Rome and under house arrest, being able to preach for nearly 2.5 years uninterrupted with bodyguards, basically. He sits on his porch every day. I think they're Paul in a rocking chair. And his only limit is he can't freely walk around the city, but word spreads quickly. So as long as he stays in his house, within the boundaries, he can say and do whatever he wants. And if people don't like what he says, he even has the protection of Rome. So there's only one other time, if you recall, where he had that level of freedom. That was in Corinth, when the local court official said, not only am I not going to pastor this Paul, but because you guys wasted my time, I'm going to have publicly scourged everyone who brought this case to my court and wasted my time. It's only the second time in his life in 30 plus years where he has had total freedom to preach. And basically, his house becomes kind of a mini pilgrimage site. Everyone, little by little, in the city of Rome, at some point comes, and these big audiences form daily. It's like the Pope's Wednesday audience in St. Peter's Square. You could just preach and preach and preach until the clock runs out. But ultimately Nero was a madman. And you're not going to get a fair hearing from Nero. Nero was insane, really. So I doubt when he had Peter and Paul executed, I doubt if he even met them or heard anything about him. This is the same guy who was using Christians as torches, street lamps. He would have people tied up and soaked in oil and lit on fire. And it is said he enjoyed listening to their screaming as they're burning to death.
That's in the movie too.
There was the nickname for that. Sadly, it's now a name of a firework, but they were called Roman candles. So if you buy fireworks, the Roman candles, that's actually named after Christian martyrs who were tied in these little niches and set on fire. And then for entertainment on a daily basis, you had people executed. Sometimes in the Colosseum, if you've been there, but that actually is a misconception. They used prisoners of war for gladiator games for the most part. Sometimes they would have intermission shows where they would bring out Christians, but they set the crowds of the gladiators. They wanted to see skilled fighters. They didn't want to see people just wiped out. But where they most killed Christians was in the Circus Maximus. And also, this was a more popular sport. So ancient Rome was they were less MMA fans, they were more NASCAR fans. Because the Circus Maximus was chariot racing. That actually was the most popular sport. It said that they could seat up to 250,000 people in the stands around the Circus Maximus. People came for the chariot races, and in the center of the track is where they crucified Peter upside down. That if you go to St. Peter's Square, where they have the Egyptian obelisk, that that marks the spot where he was crucified, where St. Peter's Basilica is now. That's in the center of what used to be the NASCAR of the ancient world. Anyway, you know, he just was happy to have bodies to kill in creative ways, and he was an insane evil dictator. So, but Paul doesn't care, he's ready to die. He just wants the opportunity to preach, and he's given that. So we'll see that last time, and then we'll get a chance cinematically to have an epilogue, if you will, for those who can see it. If you can't come, there's probably a way we can arrange an alternate date, or someone could, you know, it's part of our lending library, so someone can take it home and watch it, I'm sure, too, if that's the only way you can see it. But we'll just do that one public show, and that's September 1st, okay? Last questions or comments today?
Just a small comment.
Okay.
I read somewhere that Jerusalem is at 2,500 feet. So going up to Jerusalem is also an elevation gain, because if you're at the coast, you're definitely going up. If you're at the Sea of Galilee, you're going up. If you're at Jericho, you're going up to Jerusalem, because you're gaining an elevation. So
That's possibly true. But I guess I'd have to check, because the area where it's very mountainous is in the south. Like
right.
where the Dead Sea is and stuff, that's Dead Sea is very low
Right.
level too, so yeah. That could be, that's possible. However, I'll just say, that's why David chose it as a capital city, because it was defensible, it had a well, but I will say the principal reason why they say out is theological, because God's place should be the highest place. So it's kind of wrong. Yeah. John?
Since Agrippa had the title king, was he in a higher ruling position than Festus, or were they equal?
It's exactly the same. So the question is, how does Agrippa compare to Festus? Are they peers or whatever? It's actually the exact same structure as in the time of Jesus, because Israel originally was quartered into 4 parts, and some principal cities. Herod the Great gave like a half a dozen cities to his favorite daughter, and then he cut his kingdom into fourths, and he gave his favorite son a double portion, which is the region of Judea and Samaria. So the southern 2/3 of Israel, and the north part is chopped east and west. Herod had a part, and Philip had a part. In Agrippa's time, it's still like that. Agrippa is the king of the Galilee area. So he's coming down to see the neighboring bigwig and say, since our territories butt up against each other, I better get to know this new guy, make sure we're in good terms. And the governor is only there, if you missed before, it's because Herod the Great's favorite son was a nincompoop, and he was given a choice to be executed or exiled, and he chose exile. They took his double territory away from him because he was there were constantly grassroots military coups brewing, and it was an area of constant civil war and disruption. And so the Romans just took it back, or took it away from him, because they couldn't rule it properly. Does that help?
You could almost read like Festus was deferring to Agrippa, but really they were equal.
They're equal. They're really looking for grounds so that my paperwork's in order. Because if I send you something with my signature on it and it's a stupid waste of your time, you know, I could get in trouble for this. I would rather execute someone locally than get myself in trouble with Nero. You know, the best strategy is to stay out of Nero's radar, I think, is the idea. So make sure your things are in order, or it's going to look like you don't know how to rule either. And that never ends well. Okay, thanks guys. Let's just close with a little prayer, and we'll see you all next week. Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen. May Almighty God bless you this week in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Amen.